Hi, everyone. The people who changed your life probably didn't talk the most. And that's a dangerous truth in a world that rewards noise. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest. The person constantly explaining themselves is rarely the most certain. The one desperate to be noticed is rarely the one who holds real influence. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that leadership meant speaking more, posting more, reacting more, proving more. But if you've spent enough time around truly exceptional people, you've noticed something unsettling. The people with the greatest presence often say the least. They walk into a room and nothing dramatic happens. No performance, no announcement, no attempt to dominate. And yet somehow the atmosphere changes. People pay attention, not because they were forced to, because they want to. That is what this audiobook is about. Welcome to the Silent Power, Why Leaders Speak Less. Over the next chapters, you will discover why silence is not weakness, why restraint is not insecurity, why calm communication creates more influence than endless persuasion, why the strongest leaders are often the least reactive people in the room, and perhaps most importantly, why mastering your words begins by mastering yourself. Because leadership was never a communication problem. It was always a self-mastery problem. And once you understand that, everything changes. One sentence can change a life. Here is today's. The person who controls their words eventually controls their world. Remember that. Because by the end of this journey, you will never hear silence the same way again. And the first lesson begins somewhere most people never think to look. Inside the uncomfortable fear that makes them talk too much. Chapter 1. The noise behind the words. There is a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical work. You can sleep 8 hours, drink enough water, exercise regularly, and still feel drained. Because some people are not tired from activity. They are tired from constant explanation, constant justification, constant defense, constant talking. Talking to convince people, talking to prove themselves, talking to avoid awkwardness, talking to fill silence, talking because silence feels dangerous. And that's where this story begins. Picture a young professional sitting in a meeting. A simple question is asked. Instead of answering directly, they begin explaining, then clarifying, then adding context, then adding more context, then defending an opinion nobody challenged. 5 minutes later, the room has forgotten the original question. The person leaves feeling unheard, confused, invisible. But the real problem wasn't a lack of intelligence. The real problem was an overflow of noise. You see, when people feel uncertain, they often speak more, not less. Words become emotional protection. Every extra sentence feels like insurance. Maybe if I explain more, they'll understand. Maybe if I keep talking, they'll approve. Maybe if I add one more point, they'll agree. But influence doesn't work that way. Think about the most respected person you've ever known. Not the most famous, not the most entertaining, the most respected. How did they speak? Chances are they didn't rush. They didn't flood conversations. They didn't chase attention. Their words felt deliberate, measured, chosen. Each sentence seemed to arrive only after thought. And because of that, people listened. What makes a diamond valuable is not abundance. It is rarity. The same principle applies to words. When every thought is spoken immediately, words lose value. When every silence is filled instantly, attention disappears. When every emotion becomes an immediate reaction, authority weakens. The modern world has created a strange illusion. It teaches us that visibility equals value. Post constantly. Respond instantly. Share everything, comment on everything, react to everything. Yet, if you study the people who create lasting impact, many operate differently. They are selective, intentional, disciplined, not because they have less to say, because they understand the cost of unnecessary expression. Every word carries energy. Every conversation requires attention. Every reaction consumes emotional resources. Leaders understand something many people miss. Attention is currency, and they refuse to spend it carelessly. This becomes especially important in difficult moments. Anyone can stay composed when life is easy. Anyone can sound wise when circumstances are comfortable. The true test appears when emotions rise, when criticism arrives, when expectations collapse, when uncertainty enters the room. That is where leadership reveals itself. Imagine two people receiving harsh feedback. The first reacts immediately, explains, defends, interrupts, argues, tries to win. The second listens, pauses, processes, responds thoughtfully. One conversation creates conflict, the other creates respect. Same situation, different relationship with silence. The pause changed everything. And yet most people fear pauses. A pause feels vulnerable. It feels exposed. It feels like losing control. But often the opposite is true. The pause is control. The pause is strength. The pause is evidence that emotions serve you rather than command you. The strongest minds do not react instantly. They respond intentionally. That distinction may seem small. It changes entire lives. Because every relationship is shaped by communication. Every opportunity, every negotiation, every friendship, every marriage, every career. Communication is not simply about speaking. It is about timing, presence, restraint, awareness, the ability to know what deserves expression and what deserves silence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never learn this because modern life trains them in the opposite direction. Every notification teaches reaction. Every algorithm rewards immediacy. Every platform encourages constant expression. The result? People become experts at broadcasting and beginners at listening. Experts at reacting and beginners at reflecting. Experts at speaking and beginners at understanding. But leaders develop a different skill. They learn to observe before they speak. They learn to understand before they advise. They learn to listen before they lead. And in that process, something extraordinary happens. Their presence becomes heavier than their words. A strange thing begins occurring around truly grounded individuals. People seek their opinion even when they don't offer it. People trust them even before they prove themselves. People listen carefully when they finally decide to speak. Why? Because silence creates gravity, and gravity creates influence. If this idea resonates with you, remember it throughout this audiobook. You are not trying to become quieter. You are trying to become more intentional. There is a difference. Silence by itself is not power. Intentional silence is. And in the next chapter, we are going to explore something even deeper. Because the greatest leaders are not silent because they lack confidence. They are silent because they discovered something about human psychology that most people never see. A hidden law of influence that quietly shapes every conversation, every negotiation, and every relationship. Once you understand it, you will begin hearing the world differently, and perhaps, for the first time, you will understand why the most powerful person in the room is often the one who appears to be saying almost nothing at all. Dear viewer, We would really be grateful if you could share your ideas on how we can improve our videos in the comments. Thank you very much. Chapter 2. The Hidden Law of Influence. The person chasing attention rarely realizes they are pushing it away, and the person who no longer needs attention often becomes magnetic without trying. This is one of the strangest paradoxes in human behavior. The harder someone tries to appear important, the less important they often seem. The harder they try to convince others of their value, the more doubt they create. The harder they work to dominate a room, the more resistance they generate. Yet there are people who enter a conversation and somehow command respect without demanding it. What are they doing differently? The answer has less to do with communication and more to do with psychology. Human beings trust certainty, not loud certainty, not arrogant certainty, quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't need constant confirmation, the kind that doesn't panic when disagreement appears, the kind that remains stable whether applause arrives or not. And quiet certainty almost always speaks less. Think about a mountain. A mountain does not announce its size. It does not explain its strength. It does not seek validation from the sky. It simply stands. And because it stands, everyone recognizes its presence. Leadership works similarly. Real influence begins when your identity becomes stronger than your need for approval. Most people don't realize how much of their communication is driven by approval seeking. Watch conversations carefully. Someone shares an opinion, then immediately begin softening it, explaining it, protecting it, adjusting it. Not because the idea was weak, because they are afraid of rejection. The fear is rarely conscious, but it is there. A silent fear whispering beneath every unnecessary sentence. What if they disagree? What if they don't like me? What if I sound foolish? What if I lose status? So words multiply, and the message weakens. Leaders eventually learn something liberating. Disagreement is not danger. It is simply disagreement. The moment you stop treating every difference of opinion as a threat, your communication changes dramatically. You become calmer, more focused, more deliberate, because now you're speaking to communicate, not to survive. And people can feel the difference. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to emotional signals. They can often sense insecurity before they understand the content of what is being said. They can feel desperation hidden beneath confidence. They can detect uncertainty disguised as expertise. They can recognize when someone is trying too hard. That's why leadership is never just about words. Words are only the surface. The deeper communication is emotional. A person may deliver a flawless presentation and still fail to inspire confidence. Another person may say very little and instantly earn trust. Why? Because people listen with more than their ears. They listen with instinct, with intuition, with emotional perception. They listen for congruence. Does this person believe what they are saying? Does this person trust themselves? Does this person remain calm under pressure? Does this person seem rooted in something deeper than external validation? These questions are being answered subconsciously in every interaction, and silence often strengthens those answers. Not because silence is magical, because silence removes noise. It allows people to experience your presence rather than just your words. Years ago, a business owner faced a difficult negotiation. Months of preparation had led to this moment. Across the table sat a potential partner known for aggressive tactics. The meeting began exactly as expected. Rapid questions, pressure, challenges, interruptions, attempts to create urgency. Many people would have matched the energy. They would have rushed to respond, defended every point, filled every silence. But this business owner did something different. When a difficult question appeared, he paused, not dramatically, not as a strategy, simply because he refused to let another person's urgency become his own. He thought carefully, then answered, slowly, directly, without emotional leakage. The atmosphere shifted. The aggressive energy began losing momentum. The pressure stopped working because pressure requires participation, and calm people rarely participate in unnecessary pressure. The negotiation ended successfully, not because he spoke brilliantly, because he remained centered. That is silent power, not silence for the sake of silence, silence born from self-control. And self-control is one of the rarest forms of strength in modern life. We live in an age of immediate reactions, immediate opinions, immediate outrage, immediate responses. The distance between feeling and expression has become dangerously small. People experience an emotion and instantly broadcast it. They experience frustration and immediately react. They experience fear and immediately speak. They experience uncertainty and immediately seek reassurance. Yet leaders create space between stimulus and response. They build a gap, a sacred gap. Inside that gap lives wisdom. Inside that gap lives emotional intelligence. Inside that gap lives the ability to choose, because freedom is not the ability to do whatever you feel. Freedom is the ability to choose what deserves action. And that choice becomes easier when silence enters your life. There is another hidden benefit most people overlook. Silence reveals information. Talkative people often miss it. They become so focused on expressing themselves that they stop observing others. But quiet leaders notice patterns, body language, tone shifts, emotional undercurrents, unspoken concerns, subtle motivations. They gather information while others broadcast information. And information is power. Imagine two individuals entering the same room. One spends the entire evening talking about themselves. The other spends most of the evening listening. A few hours later, who understands the room better? Who knows people's fears, their goals, their personalities, their ambitions, their struggles? The listener, always the listener. And leadership depends on understanding people, not controlling them, not impressing them, understanding them. Because people do not follow those who know the most. They follow those who understand them the best. This is why listening is not passive. It is active intelligence. Every conversation becomes a classroom. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to learn. Every silence becomes a source of information. The person speaking reveals themselves. The person listening gathers insight. And over time, insight compounds. Just like money compounds. Just like habits compound. Just like trust compounds. One conversation may seem insignificant, but hundreds of conversations shape a leader. Every pause, every observation, every moment of restraint. Brick by brick, a stronger presence emerges. If you're listening right now, I want you to think about someone whose presence immediately earns respect. Not because of status, not because of wealth, not because of fame, because of character. What makes them different? What creates that feeling? Chances are, it isn't endless talking, it's composure, it's steadiness, it's intentionality. It's the feeling that they are not controlled by the room. The room is influenced by them. That influence begins internally. before it ever becomes visible externally, because silent power is not really about communication. It is about emotional mastery. Communication is simply where emotional mastery becomes visible. And that realization brings us to the next chapter, because once a person learns to stop speaking from insecurity, a deeper challenge emerges, the challenge of facing silence itself, not external silence, internal silence, the silence that arrives when distractions disappear, the silence where your real thoughts begin speaking. And for many people, that silence is far more intimidating than any audience. What you discover there can either transform your life or quietly control it. And that's exactly where we are going next. Chapter 3. The Conversation You Cannot Escape. The loudest voice in your life is rarely the one coming from another person. It is the voice you hear when nobody else is around. The voice that appears during long drives, late nights, quiet mornings, moments when the phone is face down and the distractions finally disappear. That voice knows things about you that nobody else knows. It knows which dreams you abandoned, which fears you hide, which excuses you repeat, which truths you've been avoiding. And this is why many people fear silence. Not because silence is empty, because silence is revealing. Noise can distract you from yourself. Silence introduces you to yourself. For some people, that introduction is uncomfortable, because beneath the constant activity, there is unresolved uncertainty, unanswered questions, lingering regret, hidden insecurity. Many spend years trying to outrun those feelings. They stay busy, stay entertained, stay stimulated, stay distracted, anything to avoid sitting alone with their thoughts. But leadership requires something different. Leadership requires self-awareness, and self-awareness begins in silence, not the silence of a room, the silence of honest reflection. There is a moment that happens in almost every meaningful transformation. A person realizes they have been listening to everyone except themselves. Family expectations, social media opinions, cultural pressure, workplace demands, the endless noise of the outside world. And somewhere beneath all of it, their own voice became difficult to hear. Not because it disappeared, because it got buried. Buried beneath years of comparison, buried beneath fear, buried beneath the need to fit in, buried beneath the exhausting habit of trying to become who everyone else wanted them to be. The strange thing is that most people don't recognize this immediately. They simply feel disconnected, restless, anxious, unfulfilled. They keep changing jobs, changing environments, changing goals, thinking the problem is somewhere outside themselves. But often, the deeper issue is internal. They have lost contact with their own truth. And truth speaks softly. You cannot hear it in chaos. Imagine standing beside a river. The water moves quickly. The current is loud. At first, it seems impossible to notice anything beneath the surface. But as you stand still, your eyes begin adjusting. You start seeing rocks, patterns, movement underneath the water. The same thing happens in life. When you stop moving constantly, when you stop reacting constantly, when you stop consuming constantly, you begin seeing what was always there. Your real motivations, your real fears, your real priorities. This is one reason great leaders often spend time alone, not because they dislike people, not because they are antisocial, because they understand something essential. You cannot lead yourself if you never listen to yourself. The modern world rewards visibility, but growth often happens in invisibility, in quiet reflection, in deliberate solitude, in moments where no audience exists. Think about the greatest decisions of your life, the decisions that truly changed your direction. They probably weren't made in crowded rooms. They were made in still moments, moments when you finally became honest. Maybe it happened late at night, maybe during a walk, maybe during a difficult season. But somewhere along the way, silence gave clarity, because clarity rarely shouts. It arrives quietly. A realization, a shift, a deeper understanding, one thought that changes everything. And here's something fascinating. The people who fear silence often become controlled by noise. If you cannot sit alone with your thoughts, you become dependent on distraction. If you become dependent on distraction, you become vulnerable to manipulation. Because whoever controls your attention eventually influences your direction. This is why attention is one of the most valuable assets you possess. More valuable than many realize. Every day there are countless forces competing for it. Advertisements, algorithms, opinions, headlines, arguments, trends. Everyone wants access to your focus. Everyone wants a piece of your mental energy. But leaders learn to protect their attention, not because they are disconnected from reality, because they understand reality more clearly. They know attention is the doorway to thought, and thought is the doorway to action. Guard one, and you influence the other. A person who cannot control their attention struggles to control their future. That may sound harsh, but observe it carefully. Where attention goes, life follows. Spend years focused on distractions, and your life reflects distraction. Spend years focused on growth, and your life reflects growth. Spend years focused on resentment, and your life reflects resentment. Attention shapes identity, which means silence is not simply the absence of sound. Silence is the environment where attention becomes intentional, where you decide what deserves your mind, where you reclaim ownership of your inner world. There was a time when a young entrepreneur believed every spare moment needed productivity. Every minute had to be optimized. Every silence had to be filled. Podcasts during workouts, videos during meals, music during work, content before bed, content after waking, constant input, constant stimulation, constant noise. At first it felt productive, but eventually something strange happened. Despite learning more information, clarity decreased. Despite consuming more knowledge, wisdom seemed further away. Because information and wisdom are not the same thing. Information enters, wisdom emerges. Information requires input. Wisdom requires reflection, and reflection requires silence. One afternoon, exhausted from endless stimulation, that entrepreneur left the phone behind and took a long walk. No music, no podcast, no notifications, just silence. At first, it felt uncomfortable, then boring. Then something unexpected happened. Thoughts started organizing themselves. Questions found answers. Ideas connected. Perspectives shifted, not because new information arrived, because existing information finally had room to breathe. That walk changed more than a business strategy. It changed a philosophy of life. Sometimes growth is not about adding more. Sometimes growth is about creating space. Space to think, space to notice, space to understand. And leadership depends on understanding, not just understanding others, understanding yourself. Because every leader eventually encounters a difficult truth. You cannot consistently lead people beyond the level of your own awareness. Your blind spots become organizational blind spots. Your emotional weaknesses become leadership weaknesses. Your lack of self-control becomes visible in every decision. This is why self-mastery comes before influence. Always. The outside world reflects the inside world. If your inner world is chaotic, your leadership eventually becomes chaotic. If your inner world is reactive, your leadership becomes reactive. If your inner world is grounded, your leadership becomes grounded. Silence is where that grounding begins. Not all at once, gradually, day by day, moment by moment, until something shifts, until you no longer fear being alone with your thoughts, until stillness becomes strength instead of discomfort, until reflection becomes a habit instead of an accident. And once that happens, something remarkable begins emerging. A presence that doesn't depend on performance, a confidence that doesn't depend on validation, a calmness that doesn't depend on circumstances, the kind of presence people notice without understanding why. Because true leadership is felt before it is explained. If these words resonate with you, take a moment and think about this question. When was the last time you sat in complete silence for 10 minutes without reaching for a distraction? Not to meditate perfectly, not to achieve anything, just to listen. You might be surprised by what you hear, and what you hear could change more than you expect, because the next lesson is where silent power begins becoming visible, not inside your mind, inside your relationships, inside conversations, inside moments where emotions rise and most people lose control. Because anyone can appear calm when life is easy. The real test arrives when pressure enters the room. And in the next chapter, we are going to explore why the strongest leaders are not the people who control others. They are the people who control themselves when everyone else is losing control. That distinction changes everything. Chapter 4. The Calm Advantage. The moment you lose control of your emotions, you surrender control of your influence. Most people never realize how often this happens, not because they are weak, because emotional reactions feel justified in the moment. Someone interrupts you, someone criticizes you, someone misunderstands you, someone questions your intentions, and suddenly the conversation is no longer about the issue. It becomes about the emotion. The voice gets sharper, the breathing changes, the pace accelerates, the mind narrows. And without realizing it, a person who is seeking influence begins giving it away. This is why emotional control is one of the most underestimated leadership skills in existence. Not intelligence, not charisma, not talent, emotional control. Because every difficult situation eventually becomes an emotional situation, a disagreement, a crisis, a setback, a betrayal, a disappointment, a failure. Life has a way of testing not what you know, but who you are. And in those moments, silence becomes a shield. Not silence that avoids reality, silence that creates space. Space between feeling and action. Space between impulse and decision. Space where wisdom has a chance to enter. There is a reason experienced leaders often appear slower during moments of pressure, not because they think slowly, because they refuse to let urgency hijack judgment. When a crisis emerges, most people become smaller. Their thinking narrows. Their awareness shrinks. Their emotions take over. But leaders do something different. They widen their perspective. They slow down internally. They resist the temptation to react immediately. And that ability changes outcomes. Imagine a ship crossing an ocean. A storm arrives unexpectedly. massive waves, violent wind, dark skies. If the captain panics, the crew panics. If the crew panics, mistakes multiply. And mistakes inside storms are expensive. The captain's greatest responsibility is not controlling the weather, it is controlling the atmosphere aboard the ship. Leadership often works the same way. You cannot control every challenge. You cannot prevent every problem. You cannot eliminate uncertainty. But you can influence how people experience uncertainty. You can become the calm center of a chaotic moment, and people remember that. More than brilliant speeches, more than impressive credentials. People remember how you made them feel during difficult times. A calm person creates emotional safety, and emotional safety creates trust. Think about the people you naturally seek during challenging moments. Who comes to mind? Probably not the loudest person you know. Probably not the most dramatic. Probably not the person who turns every inconvenience into a catastrophe. You seek the steady person, the grounded person, the one whose presence lowers anxiety rather than amplifies it. That is silent power in action. And it becomes increasingly rare in a culture addicted to emotional immediacy. Today, reactions are often celebrated more than reflection. Outrage travels faster than wisdom. Emotion spreads faster than understanding. Noise spreads faster than truth. Yet none of that changes a fundamental reality. The person who remains calm sees more clearly, and the person who sees more clearly makes better decisions. Years ago, a senior executive faced one of the most difficult moments of his career. A major project had failed. Millions of dollars had been lost. Employees were frightened. Stakeholders were demanding answers. Everyone expected an immediate response, a quick statement, a dramatic explanation, something. Instead, he gathered his team and spent most of the meeting listening. He asked questions. He observed. He took notes. Some people interpreted his silence as uncertainty. Others worried he lacked answers. But what they didn't realize was that he was protecting the quality of his thinking. He understood something many people forget. The first answer is not always the best answer. The fastest reaction is not always the wisest reaction. The loudest voice is not always the strongest voice. After listening carefully, he finally spoke. Not for long, just a few minutes. But every sentence mattered. Every word carried weight. The room changed, not because he had magical solutions, because clarity had replaced panic, and clarity is contagious. The meeting ended with renewed focus. The crisis eventually passed. Years later, people remembered that day not because of the problem, because of the composure. That is the hidden influence of emotional mastery. People may forget your exact words, but they remember your emotional example. Your behavior teaches constantly, whether you intend it to or not. Children learn from it, teams learn from it, friends learn from it, partners learn from it. Your emotional habits become emotional lessons for others. This is why leadership begins long before anyone gives you a title. Leadership begins the moment your behavior influences another person, which means almost everyone is leading someone, a child, a colleague, a friend, a family member, a community. And because of that, emotional control is not optional. It is foundational. Now here's something important. Being calm does not mean suppressing emotion. Many people misunderstand this. They think emotional strength means pretending not to care, pretending not to hurt, pretending not to feel. But suppressed emotions eventually find another exit. They emerge as resentment, exhaustion, bitterness, disconnection, True emotional mastery is different. It means feeling fully without becoming controlled by what you feel. It means acknowledging anger without becoming anger, acknowledging fear without becoming fear, acknowledging disappointment without allowing disappointment to define your decisions. That distinction is life-changing because emotions are valuable messengers, but terrible leaders. They provide information, not instructions. Fear may tell you something matters, but fear should not decide your future. Anger may reveal a boundary has been crossed, but anger should not determine your response. Anxiety may highlight uncertainty, but anxiety should not become your strategy. The leader within you learns to listen without surrendering authority, and silence helps make that possible. A pause before responding, a breath before speaking, a moment of reflection before action. These small moments seem insignificant until you realize entire relationships can change because of them, entire careers, entire futures. A marriage survives because someone paused before speaking. A partnership grows because someone listened before reacting. A business succeeds because someone stayed calm under pressure. Tiny moments, massive consequences. Most of life works this way. Great outcomes are often built from invisible decisions, and many of those decisions happen in silence. If this lesson resonates with you, consider sharing where you're listening from today. One of the beautiful things about conversations like this is realizing people all over the world are navigating the same human challenges. Different cities, different backgrounds, different lives. Yet the search for clarity, self-mastery, and meaningful leadership remains remarkably universal. Because beneath every ambition lies the same desire to become someone we can respect, and respect begins internally. The person you become when nobody is watching eventually becomes the person everyone sees, which leads us to the next chapter. Because emotional control creates calm, but calm alone is not enough. There is another layer, a deeper level of silent power, the ability to make people feel heard, not manipulated, not managed, heard. And in a world where everyone wants to speak, that ability has become one of the rarest forms of influence imaginable. What happens when listening becomes your greatest leadership tool? That is where we're going next. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 5. The person everyone talks to and nobody forgets. There is a reason certain people leave conversations with more influence than they entered them, and it has almost nothing to do with what they said. Most people walk into conversations carrying a hidden agenda. They want to impress, convince, teach, correct, prove, win. And because of that, they miss the most valuable opportunity every conversation offers, the opportunity to understand. Think about the last time someone made you feel genuinely heard, not politely listened to, not tolerated, heard. The kind of conversation where you felt safe enough to speak honestly. The kind of conversation where you didn't feel judged, interrupted, rushed, or evaluated. The kind of conversation where the other person seemed fully present. You probably remember how rare that felt. And that's exactly the point. In a world full of speakers, listeners become unforgettable. People often assume leadership is about directing attention. But some of the greatest leaders in history mastered something different. They mastered receiving attention, holding it carefully, respectfully, patiently, because when people feel understood, something extraordinary happens. Their defenses lower, their trust increases, their openness expands, and influence begins naturally, not through force, not through manipulation, through connection. Connection is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. Many chase authority while neglecting connection, yet authority without connection creates compliance. Connection creates commitment, and commitment changes lives. A manager can demand performance. A leader inspires ownership. A parent can enforce obedience. A leader develops understanding. A friend can offer advice. A leader offers presence. Presence. That word matters, because listening is not simply hearing words. Listening is offering presence. And presence has become increasingly rare. You can see it everywhere. People listening while checking notifications, listening while planning responses, listening while waiting for their turn to speak, listening physically, absent mentally. But real listening feels different. Real listening is a gift, a declaration, a silent message saying, "For this moment, you matter. For this moment, I am here. For this moment, I am paying attention." And attention is one of the most valuable things a human being can give another human being. Years ago, an executive coach worked with leaders from around the world. Some managed enormous organizations. Others led governments, nonprofits, communities, or global teams. Different industries, different cultures, different personalities. Yet a fascinating pattern emerged. The leaders most respected by their people shared one common habit. They asked more questions than they answered. At first, this seemed counterintuitive. Shouldn't leaders have answers? Of course, but exceptional leaders understood something deeper. Answers solve immediate problems. Questions reveal hidden realities. A leader who constantly talks gains visibility. A leader who consistently listens gains understanding. And understanding always outlasts visibility. Imagine sitting across from someone facing a difficult decision. They expect advice, maybe even demand it. Many people immediately begin offering solutions. But wise leaders often start elsewhere. They ask, "What are you afraid of? What outcome matters most to you? What are you not seeing yet? What would happen if you trusted yourself here?" These questions do something powerful. They help people think. And helping someone think is often more valuable than helping them agree with you. The strongest leaders do not create dependence. They create clarity. Because dependence weakens people, clarity strengthens them. This becomes especially important in relationships. Many conflicts are not actually caused by disagreement. They are caused by misunderstanding. Two people can love each other deeply and still feel disconnected, not because they lack affection, because they lack understanding. One speaks, the other prepares a defense. One shares pain, the other prepares a solution. One seeks connection, the other seeks efficiency, and both leave feeling unseen. Listening changes that. Listening slows the conversation enough for understanding to enter. It allows people to reveal not only what they think, but why they think it. Not only what they feel, but what created those feelings. That deeper layer is where connection lives, and leaders know how to reach it. Not through interrogation, not through performance, through curiosity, genuine curiosity. One of the most powerful phrases in leadership is surprisingly simple. Tell me more. 3 words, Yet those words can transform conversations because most people spend their lives feeling partially understood, partially seen, partially heard. When someone invites them deeper instead of cutting them off, trust grows. And trust is the foundation of influence. Without trust, communication becomes negotiation. With trust, communication becomes collaboration. There is another benefit to listening that many overlook. Listening protects you from your own assumptions. Assumptions are dangerous. They create false certainty. False certainty creates poor decisions, and poor decisions create unnecessary problems. When leaders stop assuming and start listening, blind spots become visible. Risks become visible. Opportunities become visible. Reality becomes visible. This is one reason arrogance and leadership rarely coexist for long. Arrogance believes it already knows. Leadership remains curious. Arrogance speaks first. Leadership observes first. Arrogance seeks validation. Leadership seeks understanding. And understanding always requires humility. The willingness to admit you do not know everything. The willingness to learn from unexpected places. The willingness to hear perspectives that challenge your own. That humility is not weakness. It is strength disguised as openness, and people can feel it. A curious leader creates psychological safety. A defensive leader creates emotional distance. One invites honesty. The other invites silence. And eventually, every organization, family, friendship, and community reflects whichever atmosphere is consistently created. Think about your own life for a moment. Who taught you the most? Not necessarily through lectures, not through speeches, through conversations. People who asked questions that stayed with you. People who listened deeply enough to see potential you couldn't yet see yourself. People whose attention felt meaningful. Those moments matter because listening communicates value, and value changes behavior. People rise when they feel valued. They grow when they feel understood. They expand when they feel safe enough to be honest. That is leadership. Not controlling outcomes. Creating environments where growth becomes possible. If a sentence from this chapter resonates with you, share it in the comments for yourself as much as anyone else. Sometimes writing a lesson down transforms it from something heard into something remembered. And remembered lessons have a way of showing up exactly when life needs them most. Now, there is something even more powerful than listening, something that separates respected leaders from merely likable people, because understanding others is important. But eventually, every leader faces a difficult moment, a moment when they must speak, a moment when silence is no longer enough, a moment when people are looking for direction, looking for certainty, looking for courage. And in those moments, the question becomes, when you finally speak, do your words carry weight? Because silence creates potential influence. But the next chapter is about how a leader turns that potential into impact, and why a single well-chosen sentence can sometimes accomplish what 1,000 words never could. Chapter 6. When few words carry more weight than many. A river does not carve through stone because it is loud. It carves through stone because it is consistent. Leadership often works the same way. The most influential people are not always the most talkative. They are often the most intentional. Every word has a purpose. Every statement has direction. Every conversation has meaning. And because of that, people listen differently. Think about how often words lose their value through overuse. promises made too casually, opinions shared too quickly, advice offered too freely, explanations stretched too long. Eventually, people stop hearing the message because the message is buried beneath excess. The problem is not lack of communication. The problem is dilution. The strongest leaders understand something subtle. Words gain power when they become selective. Imagine receiving a handwritten letter from someone you deeply respect. You open it carefully. You read every sentence slowly. Why? Because the words feel valuable. Scarcity creates attention. Now imagine receiving 50 messages from the same person every day. The emotional weight changes, not because the person changed, because abundance changed perception. Human psychology notices rarity. That is why leaders speak carefully, not because they are hiding, because they are preserving value. A person who speaks constantly teaches others to ignore them. A person who speaks intentionally teaches others to listen. There is an old lesson hidden inside nearly every great negotiation. The first person uncomfortable with silence often loses leverage. Why? Because discomfort creates urgency. Urgency creates unnecessary disclosure, and unnecessary disclosure weakens position. Imagine two people discussing an important agreement. One becomes nervous when silence appears. The silence feels awkward, threatening, uncomfortable. So they start filling the space, explaining more, offering more, revealing more. Meanwhile, the other person remains calm, comfortable, patient, present. Eventually, the conversation shifts, not because of intelligence, because one person controlled themselves while the other person allowed discomfort to control them. Life offers countless versions of this lesson. Job interviews, business meetings, relationships, family conversations, difficult decisions. The person who can remain composed during silence gains access to something valuable. Perspective. Because silence creates observation, and observation creates insight. The challenge is that modern culture rarely rewards patience. Everything moves quickly. Faster content, faster responses, faster opinions, faster conclusions. Speed often feels like competence, but speed and wisdom are not the same thing. Sometimes the fastest answer is simply the fastest mistake. Leaders learn to respect timing. A seed planted today does not become a tree tomorrow. Trust built today does not become loyalty tomorrow. Character developed today does not become wisdom tomorrow. The most meaningful things in life require patience, and patience often expresses itself through silence. There was a teacher known throughout a small community for remarkable leadership. People constantly sought guidance, advice, direction. What made this teacher different was not extraordinary intelligence, it was a habit. Whenever someone asked a difficult question, there was always a pause, not a dramatic pause, a thoughtful one. Enough silence to consider the question properly, enough silence to avoid reacting impulsively, enough silence to honor the importance of the conversation. Over time, people noticed something. The answers were rarely complicated, but they were almost always meaningful, because they emerged from reflection rather than reflex. Reflection creates depth. Reflex creates noise. And depth is becoming increasingly rare. Many people spend years developing communication skills while neglecting thinking skills. They learn how to speak persuasively, how to present confidently, how to perform publicly, but they never learn how to think deeply. The result is polished communication with shallow foundations. It sounds impressive for a while, Then reality exposes the weakness underneath, because eventually every leader reaches a moment where charisma is not enough. Only clarity remains. Only judgment remains. Only wisdom remains. And wisdom grows in quiet places. Late-night reflection, difficult experiences, honest conversations, solitude, observation, mistakes examined carefully rather than ignored. The deeper your thinking becomes, the fewer words you often need, not because you know less, because you understand more. Complexity tends to create long explanations. Understanding often creates simplicity. The most powerful insights are frequently simple enough to remember, simple enough to apply, simple enough to survive pressure. Think about some of the greatest lessons life has taught you. Chances are they can be summarized in a sentence, maybe even a few words. Trust actions. Protect your peace. Keep your word. Stay consistent. Tell the truth. Listen carefully. Small phrases. Massive impact. Leadership communication follows the same principle. The goal is not to say more. The goal is to say what matters. There is another reason leaders speak less. They understand attention. Every room has limited attention available. Every conversation has limited energy. Every meeting has limited focus. When you consume attention carelessly, people become exhausted. When you use attention wisely, people become engaged. This is why great communicators rarely try to impress. They try to clarify, because clarity respects attention. Confusion wastes it. Imagine entering a meeting where someone speaks for 30 minutes without direction. No structure, no focus, no purpose. People may remain physically present. Mentally, they are already gone. Now imagine someone speaking for 5 minutes with precision. Clear objective, clear message, clear direction. People leave knowing exactly what matters. That is leadership communication, not performance, service, helping people see clearly, helping people focus, helping people move forward. And clarity begins internally. You cannot communicate clearly if you think unclearly. You cannot lead clearly if your priorities are unclear. You cannot inspire confidence if you are constantly confused about your own values. This is why personal leadership always precedes public leadership. The conversation inside your mind eventually becomes visible in the conversations you have with others. A scattered mind creates scattered communication. A focused mind creates focused communication. A grounded mind creates grounded communication. Everything starts within. If you're enjoying this journey so far, consider subscribing or saving this audiobook for future listening. Not because numbers matter more than growth, but because meaningful reminders often arrive exactly when we need them. And sometimes, revisiting a lesson at a different stage of life reveals an entirely new meaning. Now, let's go deeper. Because speaking less is not only about influence, it is not only about communication, it is not only about leadership. There is a deeper reason, a reason connected to energy itself. Because every unnecessary argument, every unnecessary explanation, every unnecessary reaction costs something. Most people spend their energy without realizing it. The next chapter is about protecting one of the most valuable resources you possess. Not money, not time, energy. And why silent leaders often seem stronger than everyone around them. Not because they have more energy, because they waste less of it. That realization changes everything. If you like this audiobook, please give it a like. It will really help us promote the video. Chapter 7. Protecting your energy in a world that wants it. Most people think exhaustion comes from working too hard. Sometimes it does. But often, exhaustion comes from leaking energy in 1,000 invisible ways. Arguments that never mattered, opinions that never needed defending, conflicts that never needed participation, conversations that never deserved your attention. The tragedy is that many people spend years trying to increase their energy without first learning how to protect it. And leadership is impossible without energy. Not frantic energy, not nervous energy, focused energy, directed energy, sustainable energy. The kind that allows a person to remain steady when others become overwhelmed. The kind that creates consistency. The kind that builds trust. Because people trust consistency, and consistency requires energy management. Think about how much energy is lost every time you become emotionally hooked by something trivial. A comment online, a careless remark, a stranger's opinion, a misunderstanding, a criticism, a rumor, a small irritation. Each event seems insignificant by itself. But life is rarely shaped by single moments. Life is shaped by accumulation. A drop of water seems harmless, yet enough drops can carve through stone. The same principle applies to energy. 100 small distractions create a drained mind. 100 emotional reactions create emotional exhaustion. 100 unnecessary battles create burnout. Silent leaders understand this. They choose their battles carefully, not because they are passive, because they are strategic. There is a powerful question they often ask themselves. Is this worth my energy? Not every challenge deserves engagement. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves consideration. Not every invitation deserves acceptance. One of the most liberating lessons in adulthood is realizing that participation is a choice. You do not have to attend every argument. You do not have to correct every misunderstanding. You do not have to win every disagreement. You do not have to prove yourself to every person. That realization feels almost rebellious in today's world because modern culture often rewards reaction. Respond immediately, defend immediately, explain immediately, engage immediately. Yet many of the strongest people you will ever meet operate differently. They pause, evaluate, decide, and sometimes they simply walk away. Not because they lost, because they understand the value of conservation. A lion does not chase every animal it sees. It chooses. A master craftsperson does not strike every piece of wood randomly. They choose. An experienced investor does not buy every opportunity. They choose. Leadership requires the same discipline, the discipline of selection. Selection is power, because every yes requires a no. Every commitment requires sacrifice. Every focus requires exclusion. The people who accomplish meaningful things are rarely doing everything. They are doing what matters and protecting the energy required to do it well. Years ago, a successful entrepreneur was asked a question during an interview. What changed the most as your business grew? People expected answers about strategy, innovation, leadership systems. Instead, the answer surprised them. My ability to say no. That was it. 3 words, my ability to say no. Because growth had revealed a truth. Opportunities are not always assets. Sometimes they are distractions disguised as possibilities. Every invitation consumes time. Every commitment consumes energy. Every obligation consumes attention. Without boundaries, success itself can become overwhelming. This lesson applies far beyond business, relationships, friendships, career decisions, personal goals. The inability to say no often creates lives filled with obligations, but empty of purpose. You become busy serving everyone else's priorities, while your own quietly disappear. Silent leaders recognize this danger. They understand that every meaningful mission requires protection. And protection often looks like restraint, not explaining every decision, not seeking universal approval, not justifying every boundary, simply knowing what matters and honoring it. This becomes especially important when dealing with criticism. Criticism is one of the greatest tests of emotional maturity, not because criticism is always wrong, because criticism can easily hijack attention. Someone questions your choices, your values, your direction, your methods, and suddenly you feel the urge to explain everything, to defend everything, to prove everything. But here's the problem. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Not every critic deserves a debate. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Some people are seeking understanding, others are seeking reaction. Learning the difference can save years of unnecessary frustration. A wise mentor once shared a simple observation. Never wrestle with someone who enjoys wrestling more than you enjoy peace. At first, the statement sounds humorous. Then you realize how much wisdom it contains. Some people thrive on conflict. Some thrive on drama. Some thrive on emotional chaos. And if you're not careful, they will invite you into a game you never intended to play. Silent power is the ability to decline the invitation, gracefully, calmly, without resentment, without superiority, without hostility, simply choosing peace over performance, because every unnecessary conflict carries hidden costs: stress, distraction, reduced focus, emotional residue, and emotional residue is real. A single argument can occupy your mind for hours, sometimes days. Meanwhile, meaningful goals receive less attention. Important relationships receive less presence. Personal growth receives less energy. This is why protecting energy is not selfish. It is responsible. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot lead from constant depletion. You cannot inspire others while living in a state of perpetual exhaustion. Energy is the fuel behind every meaningful contribution. Protecting it matters. Now here's something important. Protecting your energy does not mean becoming distant, cold, detached, indifferent. Quite the opposite. It means becoming intentional, fully present where it matters, fully invested where it counts, fully engaged when the moment deserves it. The goal is not withdrawal. The goal is wisdom. A focused beam of light can cut through steel. Scattered light cannot. The same principle applies to human attention. Scattered energy creates mediocre results. Focused energy creates transformation, and silence helps create focus. Because silence removes interference. It helps you hear what actually matters: your values, your priorities, your mission, your purpose, without constant interference from external noise. There is a beautiful image worth remembering. Imagine carrying a bucket of water across a desert. Every unnecessary argument punches a small hole in the bucket. Every distraction punches another. Every reaction creates another leak. Eventually, you arrive exhausted, wondering why you have so little left. The problem wasn't the journey. The problem was the leaks. Most people spend years trying to carry more water. Few spend time fixing the bucket. Silent leaders fix the bucket, and because of that, they arrive stronger, calmer, more focused, more capable of making meaningful contributions. If this chapter speaks to something you've experienced, ask yourself one simple question. What is currently draining energy from my life that no longer deserves access to it? Sometimes one honest answer can change an entire year because energy, once protected, becomes available for something far more important: creation, growth, service, vision. And vision is where we're headed next. Because once a leader learns to manage words, emotions, attention, and energy, something remarkable begins to emerge: the ability to see farther than most people, to notice possibilities others miss, to remain committed while others become distracted, to move with purpose while the world moves with urgency. And that ability begins with a quiet habit that history's greatest leaders shared: the habit of thinking beyond the moment. Chapter 8. The Power of Thinking Beyond the Moment. Most people lose their future one reaction at a time, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack potential, because they become trapped inside the present moment. A comment ruins the day. A setback ruins the month. A disappointment ruins the year. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin making decisions based on immediate feelings rather than long-term vision. This is one of the greatest differences between leaders and followers. Followers often ask, "What do I feel right now?" Leaders ask, "What will matter later?" That single shift changes everything, because the future belongs to those who can see beyond the emotion of the moment. Think about a tree. The person planting it knows they may never sit beneath its shade, yet they plant it anyway. That is leadership. Leadership is the willingness to invest in outcomes that may take years to arrive, to remain committed when rewards are invisible, to stay patient while progress is still underground. And patience requires silence, because noise creates urgency. Silence creates perspective. Perspective allows you to zoom out, to see the bigger picture, to recognize that today's frustration is often a tiny chapter inside a much larger story. A young athlete once dreamed of competing at the highest level. Every day involved discipline, training before sunrise, practicing after sunset, sacrificing comfort, sacrificing convenience, sacrificing immediate pleasure. Many friends could not understand it. Some mocked the dedication, others questioned the purpose. But the athlete had learned a lesson most people never fully understand. The future is built by people who can delay gratification. The ability to sacrifice something small today for something meaningful tomorrow is one of the rarest skills in modern life, because modern life encourages immediate rewards, immediate entertainment, immediate validation, immediate comfort, immediate results. Everything is designed to shorten the distance between desire and satisfaction, but meaningful achievement still follows older rules: the rules of patience, the rules of consistency, the rules of delayed reward. And those rules require internal strength, the strength to remain committed when excitement disappears, the strength to continue when applause never arrives, the strength to work in silence while others perform for attention. That strength creates leaders, because leadership is not measured by what you do when motivation is high. Leadership is measured by what you do when nobody is watching, when progress feels invisible, when results seem distant, when doubt begins whispering. Those are the moments that define direction. There is a reason construction workers spend so much time on foundations. Nobody celebrates foundations. Nobody photographs foundations. Nobody admires foundations. People admire the finished building. But without the foundation, the building collapses. Life works the same way. Character is a foundation. Discipline is a foundation. Emotional control is a foundation. Integrity is a foundation. Vision is a foundation. And foundations are built quietly, often unnoticed, often unappreciated, yet absolutely essential. One of the greatest mistakes people make is confusing visibility with progress. Just because something is visible does not mean it is valuable. And just because something is invisible does not mean it lacks importance. Roots are invisible, yet they determine the strength of the tree. Preparation is invisible, yet it determines performance. Character is invisible, yet it determines leadership. The most important growth in your life often happens before anyone else can see it. Before the promotion, before the success, before the recognition, before the breakthrough, long before the world notices the outcome, life is shaping the person. And that shaping process is usually quiet. A musician spends years practicing scales. A writer spends years refining sentences. A business owner spends years learning through mistakes. A leader spends years mastering themselves. The world often notices the performance. It rarely notices the preparation. But preparation creates performance, always. This is why silent leaders remain focused on process rather than applause. Applause is temporary. Process creates permanence. Applause comes and goes. Character remains. Approval changes. Values endure. External validation fluctuates. Internal standards stabilize. And stability creates trust. Trust from others. Trust in yourself. The ability to look at your own reflection and know you kept your word. That kind of trust is powerful. Because self-trust changes how you move through life. You stop second-guessing every decision. You stop seeking endless reassurance. You stop outsourcing confidence to other people. You become more grounded, more decisive, more resilient. Not because life became easier, because you became stronger. And strength rarely arrives through comfort. A river becomes powerful by meeting resistance. A muscle becomes stronger through resistance. Character develops through resistance. The challenge is that resistance rarely feels valuable while you're experiencing it. In the moment, it feels frustrating, unfair, exhausting, disappointing. But years later, many people discover that their most difficult seasons taught their most valuable lessons. The rejection that redirected them, the failure that humbled them, the setback that strengthened them, the silence that clarified everything. Life has a strange way of hiding gifts inside challenges. Not every challenge contains a gift, but many contain a lesson. And leaders learn to search for lessons instead of merely counting losses. That perspective changes how setbacks are experienced. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they begin asking, "What is this teaching me?" That question creates growth. Growth creates wisdom. Wisdom creates leadership. And leadership creates impact. There is a beautiful truth hidden here. You do not need to know exactly how everything will unfold. You only need to know the direction. A ship crossing an ocean rarely sees the destination immediately. It follows a heading, a direction, a vision. Small adjustments happen along the way. Storms appear, conditions change, challenges emerge. Yet the destination remains possible because the direction remains clear. Many people become overwhelmed because they are trying to see every step. Leaders focus on the next right step, then the next, then the next. Clarity often arrives through movement, not before it. The path reveals itself gradually, and silence helps you recognize that, because silence allows reflection. Reflection reveals priorities. Priorities guide decisions. Decisions create direction. Direction shapes destiny. Everything connects. Nothing exists in isolation. The words you choose, the thoughts you entertain, the habits you repeat, the attention you protect, the energy you preserve, the vision you follow. Together, they become a life. And every meaningful life is built one decision at a time, one quiet decision, one unseen choice, one act of integrity, one moment of restraint, one step forward, again and again and again, until years later, people call it success. What they rarely see is the accumulation, the countless invisible moments that created the visible result. And those invisible moments are where silent power lives. If you're still listening, take a moment to think about one goal that matters deeply to you. Not a goal designed to impress others, a goal that genuinely matters to your future self. Now ask yourself, what small action would move me closer to that future today? Not next year, not next month, today. Because leadership always begins with action, quiet action, consistent action, purposeful action. And speaking of action, we now arrive at one of the most misunderstood dimensions of leadership, the relationship between confidence and silence. Because many people assume confidence means speaking boldly, speaking frequently, speaking forcefully. But the deepest confidence often sounds very different. It sounds calm, it sounds measured, it sounds patient. And once you understand why, you'll never view confidence the same way again. Chapter 9. The Confidence of Those Who No Longer Need to Prove Anything. One of the quietest transformations a person can experience is the moment they stop performing. Not because they gave up, not because they stopped caring, because they finally realize that proving themselves and improving themselves are not the same thing. Most people spend years trapped between those two ideas. They want respect, recognition, validation, and so they unconsciously begin performing. They shape their words around approval, their choices around perception, their behavior around acceptance. Without realizing it, they stop living from their center and start living from the audience. The audience may be friends, co-workers, family, social media, society itself. But the result is the same. Life becomes a performance, and performance is exhausting. Because the moment your confidence depends on external approval, your peace becomes fragile. One compliment lifts you. One criticism shakes you. One success defines you. One failure threatens your identity. You become emotionally dependent on outcomes. And dependence is the enemy of inner strength. This is where silent leaders separate themselves, not because they stop caring about results, because they stop building their identity around them. Their confidence comes from something deeper, something quieter, something far more stable. Self-respect. Self-respect is different from ego. Ego constantly asks, how am I being perceived? Self-respect asks, am I living according to my values? Ego seeks attention. Self-respect seeks alignment. Ego wants admiration. Self-respect wants integrity. The difference changes everything, because integrity creates internal stability, and stability creates confidence. Think about a person who always keeps their word. Not occasionally, consistently. When they promise something, they follow through. When they commit, they stay committed. When they fail, they take responsibility. Over time, something powerful happens. They begin trusting themselves. That trust becomes confidence. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that remains even when nobody is watching. The kind that survives difficult seasons. the kind that doesn't disappear when circumstances become uncertain. Most people try to build confidence from the outside in, through achievements, status, recognition, titles, possessions. But external confidence is fragile because external conditions change. Internal confidence grows differently. It grows every time you keep a promise to yourself, every time you choose discipline over comfort, every time you act according to your values, even when nobody would know the difference. That is why true confidence often looks calm. The person who knows who they are rarely feels the need to announce it. A mountain does not introduce itself. An ocean does not defend its depth. A star does not compete with other stars. They simply exist, and their presence speaks for itself. Leadership works similarly. The strongest leaders are often free from the desperate need to be seen as leaders. They focus on serving, growing, building, contributing, and influence emerges naturally. Because people trust authenticity. Authenticity is difficult to define, yet everyone recognizes it when they encounter it. It is the feeling that someone is genuine, grounded, real, not performing, not pretending, not manufacturing an image, just being. That kind of authenticity creates comfort, and comfort creates trust. Years ago, a young manager was promoted into a leadership position. Immediately, insecurity appeared. The title was new. The responsibility felt heavy. The pressure felt overwhelming. And so the manager did what many insecure leaders do: talked more, controlled more, explained more, corrected more, attempted to appear strong. But the harder the performance became, the weaker the leadership felt. People complied, but they did not connect. Eventually, a mentor offered a simple observation. You are trying so hard to look like a leader that you've forgotten to become one. The words stung, but they were true. Leadership is not an image. It is a practice. It is not something you project. It is something you embody. That realization changed everything. The manager began listening more, speaking less, observing more, reacting less, trying less to impress, trying more to understand. Months later, something unexpected happened. People began seeking advice voluntarily. Trust increased, respect increased, influence increased, not because authority grew, because authenticity grew. Authenticity always wins in the long run. It may not win immediately, but it wins eventually because people become exhausted by performance. Everyone is tired of masks. Everyone is tired of pretending. Everyone is tired of image management. A person who is comfortable being genuine becomes refreshing, and refreshing becomes memorable. There is another aspect of confidence worth understanding. Confident people are comfortable with silence because they are comfortable with themselves. That sounds simple. It is profound. Many people fill silence because silence creates anxiety. The silence feels like judgment, like pressure, like exposure. So they rush to fill it. But confident people understand something different. Silence is not an enemy. It is simply space. And space does not need to be feared. Imagine sitting across from someone who is completely comfortable in silence. No nervous laughter, no unnecessary words, no rush to perform, just presence. It feels powerful, not because silence itself is powerful, because self-acceptance is powerful. The silence is merely evidence. Evidence that the person is not at war with themselves. And people notice that, even if they cannot explain it. There is a quote worth remembering. Insecurity speaks loudly. Confidence speaks clearly. Wisdom listens. The deeper you go into leadership, the more you realize how true that is. Because leadership is not about dominating conversations. It is about creating clarity. It is not about demanding attention. It is about earning trust. It is not about appearing important. It is about becoming useful. Useful people create value. Valuable people create impact. Impact creates legacy. And legacy is built quietly, one interaction at a time, one decision at a time, one act of integrity at a time. There is a moment that arrives in every meaningful life. A moment when a person stops asking, "How do I get people to believe in me?" and starts asking, "How do I become someone worth believing in?" That question changes direction, because now the focus shifts inward, toward growth, toward character, toward contribution, toward mastery. And mastery has very little interest in performance. Mastery is busy becoming, not appearing. If this lesson resonates with you, write this sentence somewhere you can revisit it. Confidence is not knowing everyone will approve. Confidence is knowing you will remain yourself if they don't. That one realization can free a person from years of unnecessary struggle. Because approval is temporary. Character is lasting. Perception changes. Integrity remains. And integrity becomes the foundation for something even deeper. Authority. Not authority granted by titles. Authority earned through behavior. The kind of authority people recognize instinctively. The kind that requires no announcement. The kind that enters a room before a word is spoken. And that is exactly where we are headed next. Because silent power eventually evolves into silent authority. A force that changes conversations, relationships, and entire lives, without ever needing to raise its voice. Friend, write your opinion on this topic in the comments. Do you agree with us or not? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Chapter 10. The authority you cannot fake. There is a kind of authority that cannot be purchased. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be manufactured through titles, status, or appearances. And perhaps most frustrating for those chasing it, it cannot be faked for very long. Because real authority is not something people are told to recognize. It is something they feel. You have experienced it before. You walk into a room. Two people hold the same title, the same position, the same level of responsibility. Yet one immediately commands respect. The other constantly demands it. One influences naturally. The other struggles to maintain control. One creates confidence. The other creates compliance. The difference is not power. The difference is authority. And authority is built long before it becomes visible. Most people misunderstand where authority comes from. They think it comes from speaking confidently, speaking loudly, speaking persuasively. But true authority begins somewhere deeper. It begins with consistency, because consistency creates credibility, and credibility creates trust. Trust creates influence. Influence creates authority. Everything starts with consistency. Imagine two individuals making promises. The first promises often. Big promises, exciting promises, inspiring promises. Yet only half of them become reality. The second makes fewer promises, smaller promises, quieter promises, but consistently follows through. Years pass. Goodbye, friends.